like some beautiful fall weather right now. It's peak foliage and everything, so really nice.
Are you past peak?
It's getting past peak up in like the northern New Hampshire White Mountains, but down where I am, southern New Hampshire, it's right about peak time. That's really nice.
So you should be sitting
New England really shines this time of year.
So you should be sitting outside.
I should. You're right.
Is leaf peeping really
we're a little past peak here in Minnesota. Well
Zach,
on our way to 7 months of winter.
Yeah, there you go. Plenty of snow coming your way. Is leaf peeping really a term people use? Is that a thing? You know, or is that just a joke that you hear on TV shows? Really?
It is, yes. It's quite a thing. We went up to this kind of like the main highway through the mountains in New Hampshire that lots of people go, and it was like Disney World. Just the crowds out there doing it. It's kind of crazy.
Awesome, guys. We got a good mass of attendees already online, and we're a few minutes past, and we'll have some more continuing to join. But just want to welcome everybody again to our interview with Timberland and Thousand Hills Lifetime Grazed. I'm David Rizzo with the Land to Market team. We're excited for this next episode in the Eat It, Wear It, Regenerate It series. And just want to go through a few housekeeping items for everyone, just simple things around all of you attendees are muted to prevent background noise, just so you know. There's a Q&A function built into this Zoom webinar that is the best place for you guys to ask your questions. So if there's any questions that come up during the webinar, feel free to type your answers in there. We will be answering everything behind the scenes while the conversation is going on between Chris, Zach, and Matt. And then any questions that don't get answered by the end of the webinar, we will put a list out to the group in this panel and have them answer those questions as they can. You also have the chat function. You know, we always recommend using it sparingly. It's great for having conversation between attendees, but it can also distract you guys from the great content that they will be sharing. And the same thing with your phone and other applications. We'd love to have you full attention, but understand that everybody's busy, but keep it in mind. So excited to share with you guys our speakers today. Chris Kirsten, as you guys have seen in our previous episodes, always leads these wonderful conversations. We have Zachary Angelini, who is the Environmental Stewardship Manager from Timberland, and Matt Maier, who is the farmer owner and regenerative renegade at Thousand Hills Lifetime Grazed. Well, guys, I'll let you take it from here.
Sure. Thanks, David. Yeah, I'd like to kick these off with just kind of a brief. I know every time we have these, we get new folks involved. And so I'd like to just give kind of a brief overview of what land to market and ecological outcome verification are. Trying to make these shorter every time as we are getting repeat viewers. And we've got a really full schedule today. So sometimes at the end, we'll have room for a Q&A. Today, if you guys can do that all digital, David and Bobby will help you out with that, as he mentioned. But we're going to try to shorten up the intro a little bit. So EOV, for those that don't know, measures outcomes on the land. We believe that the term regenerative, that is getting so popular and really coming into its day in the sun, is ultimately about positive environmental outcomes, which means it must be measured. So we spent 6 years developing a protocol that measures real environmental outcomes. So we're looking at soil health, sequestered carbon, water, and biodiversity. So we're wrapping around kind of that whole ecosystem. And then we've measured 2 million acres globally right now through that program. Land to Market is our program that picks up from the farm gate forward through the rest of the value chain. This is really where communication to the consumer comes in. We work with brands on 3 pillars: supply, science, and story, to really create a comprehensive package for them and their needs. So we have previous webinars on this, one specifically on land to market, and then multiple with other brand partners that we're working with. But with time in mind, we are going to dive in because we have a lot of meat to talk about today. So I'm going to start out with Zach and say, Zach, just give us a little history about Timberland and you guys being a leader for progressive change in the industry. Give folks a little bit of sense of kind of some waypoints on that journey and kind of what you all have been known for.
Sure. Thanks, Chris. Yeah, so Timberland has a really long history of environmental stewardship and social responsibility dating back to 1994, actually. And I could probably spend the whole hour telling that whole history, but I'll just pull out a couple highlights that relate well to this conversation today. So back in 2007, Timberland launched our first ever Earthkeepers boots. And really these boots and this Earthkeepers platform was used as a testing ground for eco-innovations for us. And the major eco-innovation that we launched at that time was sustainably tanned leather that was sourced from tanneries rated silver or gold for best environmental practices by the Leather Working Group. And Timberland actually helped to co-found this Leather Working Group in order to really address the environmental impacts of the tanning industry. And so from that pilot Earthkeepers launch, where we first used this more sustainably tanned leather, we scaled it significantly from there over time. Now today, over 96% of Timberland's leather comes from these tanneries rated for best environmental practices. So the cool thing about it is that by doing this and launching this innovation and scaling, we not only managed to revolutionize our own supply chain, but really help to change the entire leather tanning industry. Because today, basically all of our competitors in the industry as a whole is sourcing from these more sustainably managed tanneries. So I think it's a good example of how we introduced an innovation through this Earthkeepers platform and then managed to scale it from there. And the idea of Earthkeepers is something that we're continually evolving over time and really using it to push the boundaries on eco-innovation. And so the next eco-innovation and boundary that we're really pushing is relaunching Earthkeepers with now regenerative leather, which just launched this fall, our first ever boots with regenerative leather, which we're obviously really excited about. And really through that, working with you, Savory, and Matt from Thousand Hills and our other partners, really going further back in the supply chain. So we addressed the tanning stage of the supply chain. Now we're looking to go all the way back to that farm and ranch level and really influence change from conventional cattle ranching practices, which we know can have a really significant negative impact on the environment, to regenerative practices, which I think present this really exciting opportunity to not just lessen our negative impacts on the environment, but actually help to heal and restore the environments that we source from. So just like the example I shared with sustainably tanned leather, we're really hoping to do that same thing with regenerative leather, take it from this initial pilot launch phase, which we're in right now, to significant scale over the next several years. And so overall, I think we're very excited about the progression of this work and the direction that we're headed, and really how this partnership with Savory and Thousand Hills is helping us along on that journey.
Yeah, no small feat to be skipped over that you have 96% of your leather coming from gold and silver level tanneries. That is a big deal. I don't think there's too many brands that can claim that. So you guys have already done a lot of work on the value chain, and now to be able to go full traceability back to farm and then utilize the work that you're doing with us to be able to say, hey, we've got hard data on the actual impact here, and we're sourcing from the farms that are making their landscapes better. Pretty innovative. David, maybe pop the picture of the boot up here. And Zach, anything else you want to tell us about the boot? I mean, I just, this is obviously the first here. It just launched on the first of the month. But tell us a little bit more about, kind of this model and kind of, where your thinking is in terms of around, obviously you guys are clearly investing in regenerative as the next frontier. Where does Timberland see value in that? How does Savory fit in? Give us a little bit more sense of that.
Totally. Yeah. So this boot is exciting because it's really the first proof point towards our new product innovation vision and goals that we actually just recently set. And really the overarching goal is for 100% of Timberland's products to make a net positive impact on the earth by 2030. So that goal is really underpinned by this belief that sustainability is no longer enough. Really, to sustain is to keep things as they are or be neutral. And we know that the environment is already in a severely degraded state. I think you did a really awesome job sharing that in some of the previous EOV webinars, and really just highlighting that neutrality is not enough, especially when, as brands, we have this pretty amazing opportunity to actually actively restore the environments that we source from. And regenerative agriculture is really what presents us with that opportunity, especially for us where the majority of our top volume materials are natural materials, predominantly leather, of course, which is why this product is such a big deal for us, but then cotton and natural rubber as well. So we definitely obviously see really strong value from this from an environmental perspective, but then also from the business side as well. We know that these practices can help build a much healthier and more resilient supply base. And really by working this far down in our supply chain, we're gaining access to new opportunities, potential for new efficiencies within the supply chain, and really the opportunity for incredibly rich storytelling through the farmers who are basically on the front lines doing this really incredible work to reverse environmental degradation and reverse climate change. And really telling that story is going to be important for us as we build our brand into the future.
Yeah, this is really where, what Zach's talking about is where it showcases those pillars of, we can help brands find the supply that's verified to be regenerative. We can help them communicate that impact through, various different outlets, whether that's speaking to new, kind of compliance regulations or UN Sustainable Development Goals, or meeting your own CSR goals, or setting SBTs, and then wrap a story around that and be able to communicate that both to internal and external stakeholders effectively. So it's so exciting to see this boot come out. I know we've been working on this for a while. We also have Matt on from Thousand Hills Lifetime Grazed. Matt, give us a sense from kind of the producer perspective. Zach's leading sustainable innovation over at Timberland. You're running a really innovative grass-fed producer cooperative. Kind of tell us about how this kind of whole thing comes together, and what the idea of like leather for producers means. Producers that have been on the front edge of selling really high quality meat now have an opportunity to segregate their leather and differentiate it. Tell us a little bit more about that.
Well, as a brand, I'd have to go back a ways. I think collectively we're all an example of, and this launch represents overnight success that took about 17 years in the making for us.
Right? It's been a journey. Yep.
So we, when we started 17 years ago in grass-fed beef, we wanted to make sure that we were positively affecting the land, and that we were doing this responsibly, and we weren't just, as a producer, seeking a premium that would meet any definition of grass-fed beef to gain a premium on beef. We started with the land and how can we use cattle to improve our land, and this byproduct being a highly nutritious product. So we started on that path, and fortunately, now there's a term that encompasses what we always had to kind of clumsily say was, well, here are all the list of things we don't do, and here's all the list of things that we do, and somehow together we call it something like true grass-fed beef. Now, within the last few years, we can call it regenerative agriculture, and it can sum up all of our practices in grazing and land management, and water management, all that, and have that as an explanation. But we were so excited, first of all, that, being a Minnesota hub of Savory, we got to see this idea develop with EOV. And as we saw it, we thought, okay, this is exactly what we need to do as a brand, because we can say all these do's and don'ts, but until we can actually verify, even for our own knowledge, that beyond our anecdotal evidence, that we are regenerating the land and we have a third party certifying it, well, what good is it? It's still great, but this was really the proof point. So that development of EOV, and then when Timberland comes along, I really get excited when I hear Zach basically reciting how we differentiate our product and our brand, in that sustainable isn't good enough, and all those terms. So when Timberland raised their hand, it was them raising their hand, coming to you, Savory, saying, we want to do this. We want to look into this. How do we verify that indeed the hides are regenerative. How, you know, and a lot of vetting and a lot of questions that made us all better. But from a producer's perspective, then it gives you an opportunity to pull what is really a byproduct in the conventional sense of the hide out of the conventional stream. I won't get into all that complexity just yet, but the fact that what really the catalyst is Timberland saying, we're committed to this and we want to verify this. We want to make sure this is really bulletproof. So then we can all roll up our sleeves and figure out, okay, how do we satisfy this?
Yeah, I got into the direct marketing game in livestock and selling grass-fed meat direct to consumers in 2001. In that time, I've been thinking all along about how do we value add the leather? But it's like you said, Matt, it's a waste product of the meat industry, and its current supply chains are really designed to prevent transparency. Leather Working Group is another group out there that works on this stuff, and they estimated that a typical hide makes about 3 trips around the globe, about 60,000 miles before it finds its kind of final destination. I just want people to kind of be able to calibrate to that what we're talking about is a global brand like Timberland that has created and done the hard work of creating a micro supply chain and working with a producer group, yours in this case, Matt, to be able to move that product through their value chain in a way that it can still be identified and shown to maintain these elevated claims of being grass-fed and having positive environmental outcomes. I'm seeing in the chat that we're getting some questions. Oh, one question was about feedlot. So this is a grass-fed product. Matt, who's your certifier for grass-fed?
American Grass-Fed Association.
Yep. So all this for this launch, all this leather was grass-fed. And then just give a little bit of sense of EOV. I'm seeing some questions about the platform and what gets measured. Dive into that for a second in terms of what that process looks like from the farmer perspective. And then I'll just give the Savory perspective in advance. All that goes into a global platform that we've built that houses that data. But just give a little bit on EOV and what that looks like.
Well, for our EOV measurements, we go to every farm and ranch that we source, which is 50 for our brand. So that alone is a big commitment. And then we go into basically observation sites and identify those sites, and then dive in deeper into soil samples, plant species identification, amount of cover on the land, thickness of forage, and a whole set of observations around plant, land health, and very extensive and very in-depth soil analysis that goes along with it. And then we monitor those sites over time, revisiting them every year with a whole new set of measurements to verify what is happening with the soil, what is happening with the plants, the cover on the land, which is very important, and even observationally other biological and wildlife activity. So extensive, which we entirely embrace, and quite an investment, I will say, for our brand. We committed to our entire supply would be EOV, and 3 years after that decision now, I'm very happy that we made that decision and made that investment in going down this path.
Yeah. So for those that aren't familiar, kind of other programs will often equate practices to outcomes. So it'll be like, okay, if you don't do tillage, you get, these kind of positive points towards environmental outcomes, or maybe they'll try to model it and equate it to a carbon benefit. What we did here that was different is we said, we're going to go measure actual outcomes on the land. So it's a mixture of quantitative and qualitative empirical outcomes. And again, just to give you those broad strokes that I gave at the beginning, there's about 24 data points that get collected on a per annum basis. But in the broad categories, that's, again, soil health, sequestered carbon, water holding rates, and soil water holding capacity, and infiltration rates, and biodiversity. So it's really trying to be that comprehensive wraparound. So saw some questions on that, wanted to dive into that.
It's just Zach,
I just wanted to note too, to be clear, our brand has its own set of protocols that are requirements for our producers. Mm-hmm. That include things, we brought up feedlots, that includes no confinement feeding of any type. That the cattle need to be on the land. If we're going to regenerate the land, they have to be on the land. So there's our list of our protocols that we already certify ourselves, I would say. And then there's the American Grass-Fed Association protocol that's third-party certified. And then there's the EOV, Ecological Outcome Verification from Savory, that takes all of that from those first two are practices that are either required or not required, yeses or nos. And then the third is, what is the outcome of those practices? So that's a big step forward in the certification in the industry, huge step.
Right. Yeah, I was just going to add too, as a brand, this is really critical to us. We help to co-fund the EOV measurements on Thousand Hills Farms. And right now we can talk about the benefits of regenerative agriculture directionally, but we're really excited to start to get these actual tangible measurements. And it's going to be critical as we start to measure ourselves against that net positive goal that I mentioned.
Yep. And that's a good transition. You know, I think when people think Timberland and even VF Corp, your parent company, a lot of the kind of zeitgeist is focused on circularity. Tell us where regenerative intersects with that and where you guys are seeing that.
Definitely. Yeah. So when we think about the idea of net positivity, it's really built on the two pillars of circularity and regeneration. So through circularity, that's where we're really aiming to minimize the negative impacts that we have through product creation, the amount of energy that's used, the amount of emissions, the amount of waste that's produced, really heading towards the idea of neutrality through that pillar there. But then with regenerative agriculture, that's really where we're aiming to tip the scale into the net positive space. So both are really important because we're talking about net positive. We need to minimize the negative impacts as much as possible, as close to zero as possible, and then maximize those positive benefits within the supply chain as much as possible to achieve that net positivity. And really, like when we think about designing our products and using these regenerative materials where so much thought and hard work and care is going into growing them and making them, we want to make sure that we maximize their value by keeping them in play as long as possible. So that obviously starts with the idea of durability, which is something that has always been part of Timberland's DNA and will continue to be laser focused on that into the future. But we're now also adding these ideas of designing for repairability and designing for recyclability so that when these products reach the absolute end of a long and useful life, those materials aren't going to end up in a landfill, but instead can be made into something new. So it's definitely an exciting challenge for us in footwear. Footwear is traditionally really difficult to recycle because it's typically this kind of monstrous hybrid of materials that can't be efficiently recycled altogether. You really need to be able to separate those materials out and recycle them in their respective recycling streams in order for it to be done efficiently. So we have a lot of innovation and work going on now on these ideas of products that are designed for disassembly so that those materials can go into their respective recycling streams.
Sure. And so much of these discussions to date, you know, our Eat It, Wear It, Regenerate It series has been really kind of focused on, you know, B2B, how does a brand benefit from this? This is our first time to be able to have producers on. And so, Matt, I'd love to hear from your perspective. And I know we've got other producer groups that are involved in this that are on the call here. Matt, give us a sense from a producer, what kind of signals does this send in terms of spurring change and kind of bringing everybody along on a journey and connecting with the market as kind of a pull-through vehicle for that?
Well, I'll broaden that some to yes, there's impact with the producers, and there's also an impact with processors. Because for us to be able to, for any of the brands that are working or producers that are working with Timberland, we're going to a smaller scale processor than what's traditional and conventional beef. So we do that, and this product, the hide, along with what's called offal or other byproducts, are swept away into the conventional market by the processor. But the financial gain from that offal helps the processing cost for that as a revenue stream for the processor, which helps us reduce our costs in processing. So that's just the way the model's been set up for decades. It's just, that's the way it exists. So we normally don't get our hands on some of these products. They're going into the conventional stream. However, in the smaller scale processor, they really see a penalty because they don't have the scale of product like the big processors would have. So it almost becomes a burden for everybody involved. It becomes a burden for the companies taking the products away. It becomes a burden for the processor. There's a small financial gain, which just further magnifies the inability to compete due to that lack of scale. So it makes it even more difficult to compete in the marketplace when you don't have a market. And then the small processor doesn't have staff to go build these markets of the products that they're gaining in their harvest. So it just kind of, I've watched it kind of keep repeating that I wish there was something we could do. Well, lo and behold, if somebody is saying we want that, now the creative destruction begins of the existing supply chain to get to the innovation. And Timberland again becomes that catalyst. The demand is created. Now we can creatively destruct that supply chain, get value for the processor and get value for the producer, who then, there's a direct financial benefit to that, but there's also as a producer, you take a lot of pride in these regenerative practices and the fact that you're working on something much bigger than yourself. Mm-hmm. And you want every bit of that energy that you've poured into this to be recognized and to be used and to be put into the market where the consumer can then vote with their dollar to say, yes, I want that product. Yes, I value those practices. Yes, I will pay for it. That has that ripple effect through producers, through the processor and the brand, so that we can see that we can decouple ourselves from the conventional beef industry and recognize more value in the package, if you will. So it has a ripple effect, and it will continue as we rebuild this supply chain, redirecting these products to that consumer who values this. We've seen it happen in the beef products, that decoupling, but we haven't seen it happen in the byproducts or the offal up until now.
Yeah, you talked a lot about processing, and I want to come back to that, and I want to go into some depth on the partners that came to make this a reality. But real quick, I want to go into just another piece that was kind of inferred in what you said there. We really see this opportunity to really elevate farmers for the first time in really history. If you think about it, the whole world's kind of awakening to the notion that the soil and good soil management can help heal so many of society's biggest problems. So whether that's climate change or world hunger or water insecurity or poverty and struggling rural economies, the soil plays a role in each of those. And so now everybody from the more government side to private sector, they're all kind of collectively waking up to this notion, which really puts farmers front and center as our ambassadors to this solution. And yet for all of human history, they've been kind of relegated to the peasant class. What do you guys think about this kind of changing view of this important sector of society, this agrarian backbone of society, and the opportunity to start sending those signals and kind of elevating their quality of life and elevating their even just role in society here?
Yeah, I mean, I would just say that I think there's a real win-win opportunity both for farmers and brands to tell the story. Basically, I think as brands we can help amplify the story of the farmers, but also we know from our experience so far that farmers are incredible storytellers. Matt and his farmers, for example, but also other prominent regenerative farmers in the space, they're incredible storytellers. They have such passion and really that is helpful, obviously, for us as a brand to get the word out there about our commitment. So really, I think it is a win-win. And I also think that we know consumers, we do a lot of consumer insights work, and we know that consumers are having an increasing focus on sustainability. I think what we're starting to see really an early sign and signal of is consumers transitioning from just expecting brands to lessen their negative impacts to now, oh, not yet, but in the future, likely really expecting brands to do more than that, to actually have a positive impact on the environment. And so obviously that's what this opportunity gives us. And as a brand, that might be a really early signal, and it's not in the mainstream today, but as a brand and all brands, like we respond to demand, but we also work on demand creation. That's a major part of what we do as a brand, and where we know the incredible impact that this can have and that this is the direction that we want to head. We can help create the demand in that direction by really making it cool and elevating the stories and raising consumer awareness. And really it's the farmers that are going to enable us to do that.
You know, it turns out I had a conversation with my wife this morning that I'd like to share that gets to that question. I grew up on a farm. It was typical of a farm in central Minnesota. It was 120 acres, and we had multi-species, grass-based operation. I was the only boy, 3 sisters. And my dad worked in a factory during the day, so he had the 7 to 3 shift, and he'd be home by 4 o'clock. And the factory job funded the farm because the farm didn't fund itself. It did not turn a profit. But what we had was a great lifestyle, and we had great food year round, but we were broke. And I remember distinctly being a kindergartner, and they were going around the room saying, "Hey, what are you going to do when you grow up?" I don't remember what my answer was, but I remember the answer of the kid, my neighbor friend who's sitting next to me. He probably said, "I'm going to become a farmer." And I remember thinking in my head, "Oh, that's too bad. That kid's not very smart. He's gonna, you know, that's not a great career path, dude. That's not going to work out very well."
In kindergarten.
And I had already, that didn't just come from nowhere as a 5-year-old mind. That came from my parents beating it into my head that, look, this is all great and everything, but if you want to make a living, you're going to have to do something else in addition to farming, and you're going to need to get an education. You're going to need to go, well, not that farmers don't have an education, but you're going to have an alternative career path if indeed you want to farm, because that's not really a career. And so I did. You know, I happily left the farm, happily went and had another career in the conventional food industry. But when I had the opportunity to stop and think about what do I want to do next, I was drawn back to the land, and I was drawn back to the lifestyle, and I was drawn back to, I want my kids to experience some of that. If only there was a way that we could make this profitable, then we could sustain the farm while we regenerate the land. And if we could get there, I think I represent millions of kids sitting in that kindergarten class that made a decision based upon what they saw going around them, which then led to this, one of the pieces that led to the big consolidation in agriculture that made it impossible for a young person to become involved unless they inherited a bunch of land and equipment. So I think this is a piece of the puzzle that solves that question about how can a young person become involved in agriculture and at the same time earn a living. And if we can just make that step, regardless of how we're seen by society, just that you could experience the lifestyle, you could participate in something bigger than yourself, you can contribute to the food system. And I never even put my head around contribute to the fashion world. I mean, that's never even hit my radar until about 2 years ago. But, that's, if we can make that progress as a society, we will benefit in so many ways to have those minds involved in agriculture and regenerative agriculture.
Exhibit A of great storytelling.
Right. Right. Yeah, totally. Yeah, this is the example of the type of thing that we're trying to fix at the meta level. And we could dive into this topic for a week and I think have really fruitful conversations. The point of today's webinar, though, is to really bring both ends of the chain together, though, and say, okay, here's raw material, here's kind of finished brand that's pumping product into retail and selling some direct to consumers, and now we've there's a piece figured out in the middle here that's really critical. I can't tell you how often we talk to brands that go, well, there's no supply out there, and that we talk to farmers that go, well, there's no buyers out there. And it's all about the pieces in the middle and those players in the middle, which is really critical. So I'd love to hear from you guys, kind of soup to nuts, what it was like to set up this custom supply chain, because I think in some ways, if I was a brand sitting listening to this, that's the piece I would have to figure out to say, okay, how am I going to take this to my bosses or to our board and say, this is doable? We get the concept that this makes sense, but how do we actually execute on it? Let's dive into that. So Matt, maybe start with you on, let's just even think linearly. Let's start with kind of raw material, animals on the farm. Let's talk about the steps here of what has to happen to get product to Timberland on their website and in their retail partners.
Yeah, I would say, well, I was putting myself in Zach's shoes and admiring the fact that the step number one is roll up your sleeves.
Right.
Because it's not easy, but it's not impossible either. And by rolling up the sleeves and contacting the organizations that are prevalent, if you do a little digging, you can find the organizations that are prevalent in regenerative agriculture. You can find Savory, you can find Thousand Hills, you can find American Grass Association, you can find producers in that case, but it does take outreach to get there. Maybe I should look at it this way, but I feel like from a producer standpoint, you're in a little bit of a reactionary mode because yes, you are in essence producing the product, but and especially in our case, that very established supply chain was already put in place, and we really couldn't directly affect that. It took the combination of us, other half processing, working on behalf of us, and Timberland, all really, and Savory, all sitting at the table going, okay, how do we make this happen? Because if Zach would have come to me and said, hey, I'd like to, I need to buy some hides, I don't see a path on how I could have just single-handedly made that happen.
Right.
And when you say, yeah, we created the supply chain, I want to add an asterisk there. We're still building that supply chain, and I still feel like we're on step number one, with producing this booth, and that there's still a lot of work to be done in the creative destruction of existence. And
that we is a big collective. So that's not just the three of us. That is our teams and partners. And then let's talk a little bit about Lawrence, and then let's come to other half processing. But am I right that Lawrence, aren't they the abattoir that's mentioned in Michael Pollan's Omnivore's Dilemma?
Yeah, they are. They're a unique processing facility. that really grew up in more recent times, specifically focused on, let's say, more responsibly raised proteins, bison, cattle, even hogs.
Yep. So they've already kind of been heralded for their, transparency. They're kind of famous for this glass viewing area. People can come and see what's happening. If people aren't familiar with the term abattoir, more colloquially, this is the slaughterhouse, and can sometimes also include the cut and wrap plant. So typically what happens is a live animal leaves one of the farms that's partnered with Matt and Thousand Hills, goes to the abattoir, and the parts and pieces start to go different places. Matt can get his meat back, but part of the value prop to the processor is they're going to sell the offal, some people say offal, and the hide, and start selling those into other more commodity markets for those things. And now there's a world emerging both from pet food and from textile saying we want to differentiate those things, and we want to hold on to those elevated claims, whether that be grass-fed, or could be fair trade, or could be regenerative. We want to hold on to those elevated claims of what all the good work that Matt and his collective of farmers are doing, and be able to access that. So you've got to bring Lorenz to the table. You've got to bring the abattoir to the table and say, we've got to figure out a mechanism for this. Then it's got to go from there to the tannery. Do you want to kind of pick up there, Zach, in terms of, I could just share again, Leather Working Group, you can go look up their site. They've done some work on this. Typically a hide makes something like 20 stops around the world before it's done those 3 trips. So it goes through all sorts of aggregators and multiple stages of tanning sometimes. And Timberland was able to kind of find some partnerships that would help distill that down into a much simpler process.
Yeah, exactly. So you kind of alluded to it at the beginning, Chris, when you mentioned that there really was no off-the-shelf option for regenerative leather. When we first started learning about this, which was 4+ years ago, starting to see the research that was coming out and the really incredible potential, we were obviously really excited about it and starting to just dig into where could we get this leather. And typically where we go to our tanneries or our fabric manufacturers and ask them for what they have available in terms of sustainable materials, and they'll present us with what they have in terms of the more established sustainable materials like recycled or organic, things like that. There was no option for regenerative. So we really had to work together with all of the partners that Matt and you mentioned to build the supply chain really from the ground up. And Other Half Processing was a really key tactical partner for us. They basically serve as our regenerative hide broker, basically connecting these early adopter regenerative ranches in with our large scale tannery partners. And definitely have to give a shout out to ISA Tantech, who is that large scale tannery partner that we worked with on this project. This, to start, is a really small scale pilot that probably took really outsized time and effort in financing to get it off the ground. But I think they really saw the direction that we're heading as a brand and the potential of it. So they were a great partner to help get it off the ground. And I think just with this launch of the first product, with us putting out the goal that, hey, by 2030, we're aiming to source 100% of our natural materials, including leather, from regenerative sources, I think it really helps to send the signal to the supply chain so that we're not constantly having to go out and find ourselves and build these supply chains, but soon we'll have our tanneries doing that outreach for us as well and really expanding the reach. I think the next several years will probably be similar type of heavy lift, but as it expands, that's where we hope to get it to the point where it actually is an off-the-shelf option, and us as well as our competitors can source it. And in that way, we're really amplifying the impact.
Yeah. So, Other Half Processing, I want to give a huge shout out to those guys here. The conversation today was really about the kind of the disparate ends of the supply chain. We were going to have another conversation more focused on the value chain and the processing piece, but just to kind of give full visibility to everybody, our heavy lift at the Savory side was we're going to go out and measure and show verifiably what's regenerative. Everybody said that's impossible. You can't scale up a mechanism to go measure real world attributes in an empirical way at farm level. It's too big. You have to use modeling. And we said, well, let's just see what we can do here. And I think we've found tremendous success there, and that's growing exponentially. I think, Timberland's heavy lift in this was to say, we're going to make this a priority. We're going to do the due diligence. We're going to figure out how to segregate this and tell that story effectively. But there's a big piece missing there in the middle of Matt is selling live animals and Timberland is making boots out of leather. And there's a lot of pieces in between there. And so what Jim and Mark, they're two brothers, they founded the company, this Other Half Processing. What they've put together is the ability to trace that leather, simplify these supply chains, create a value prop for everybody at the table. And they're another component of, people that everybody would have said, oh no, that's impossible. I can't tell you how long over the last 2 decades I've heard it's impossible to be able to trace leather back to farm at any sort of scale. It's impossible to find players along the value chain that are going to keep that product segregated and produce anything with any sort of quality. Over and over again, it's impossible. And I think the three of us came together and said, we've each got our piece of impossibility. And just through innovation and stubbornness and gumption, we've kind of made headway there to bring this minimal viability to the marketplace. So huge shout out to those guys. I know they're on listening. For other listeners, know it is our full intention to come back and do additional episodes around the value chain and dig more into that nuance, but it is a critical piece that can't be overlooked.
Yeah, I would echo that. If it was solely our responsibility to go remake that supply chain, fresh beef and the hides and everything involved is a very, very thin margin business driven by big food. And we have to compete every day. So we really don't have the extra resources that would have been required to make this happen. All we could do is get the animals there with the right processes and raising it, right practices. But to dive in deeper, they're absolutely essential.
Yeah, exactly. I think they really filled a necessary white space in the industry, which has been critical.
A pretty big one for sure.
Yeah.
Well, that kind of brings me then to our next question of, is this scalable? We're talking about minimal viability here a lot. We're talking about a single producer cooperative in Minnesota and a single boot. But from both of your perspective, how does this scale and kind of grow? And we've already kind of tipped that a little bit. There's now others producers coming into the program, and it is getting bigger. But both give us a sense of that, of what that looks like.
Sure. Yeah. So, I'd say absolutely. Just looking at this regenerative leather program to begin with, we're already looking at scaling it significantly over the next several seasons. But really strategically using these initial seasons and these pilot launches as test and learn opportunities to really identify key unlocks to more significant scale in the future. So that's kind of immediately what's going on. And then, as I mentioned, we have this much more broad regenerative agriculture goal around all of our natural materials for 2030. And as we worked on developing that goal, obviously a lot of research was done. We explored a lot of different eco-innovation territories and spaces to understand, one, like where could we have the greatest impact, which regenerative was a clear winner. But then two, which of these innovation spaces have the highest growth trajectories? And regenerative agriculture by far had the most significant growth potential. And that really gave us the confidence that growth is happening already. And then on top of that, we believe that as a major company in this space, we can significantly help to catalyze that growth. When we put out a public goal like this, it not only helps to trigger our supply chain to change and meet our demand, but also hopefully triggers our competitors to set similar goals. And then when we're all heading down this path as an industry together and asking our shared suppliers for the same things, that will in turn really reduce the frictions to achieving those goals collectively. But I really think that just for other for other brands, the key is obviously to get these projects off the ground. It is a major heavy lift at the start. But I think the key is really just getting through that heavy lift phase. And for us, now that we made the first product and really got that first tangible proof point that it can be done, we're starting to see the beginnings of a snowball effect from there. I think things start to become a little bit easier, a little bit more integrated into our normal processes as we scale. And definitely, don't get me wrong, there's still going to be tons of challenges to scale this as we go. But just a little less friction to do so now that we've just proven that it's possible and proven that there is value in doing so. And just to share a story as well, to get through that heavy lift phase, I think, which was honestly, it just involves extra work for everybody internally on our teams. And so the key was really keeping people inspired and motivated about the potential that this type of farming has for the world. And obviously Savory was a major help in doing that with all of the research and content that you've compiled. But I think one of the most successful and powerful things that we did is actually had Matt come into our global brand headquarters and really share his story about the tangible impacts that he's seeing on the land. And I know that hearing that firsthand account really provided our teams with the fuel to figure it out, and even when it was so difficult, and really get through that initial heavy lift phase.
You know, if I could segue from that, I was honored to be invited into Timberland to speak at their Earth Week. And they had a speaker series going on. And there was a couple of things that I took away from that day. We had meetings prior to the lunch speaking that day. And this speaks to the scale part of this too. What I was most impressed by that morning was the fact that I learned that this project wasn't some little cute sustainability project that Zachary had drummed up and was told, oh, go see if you can make this happen. And if you can, great. But if you don't, well, just add it to your list of projects and we'll move on. Instead, every departmental team was involved. The senior people in every one of those disciplines was involved. They were all showing up at the meetings, all excited about it. So as a third party observing this, like, wow, the energy around this, the commitment to this at all levels in the organization. So for other brands listening, that's one of the things that I think Timberland just does probably as a way of business. I don't know, but it was impressive from the outside to say, okay, there's commitment here. I walked away feeling like there's commitment, there's energy around this. And then when I was fortunate enough to be able to share some regenerative agriculture background and practices with the broader office, Zach said, well, I'm not sure, we do this once in a while. I'm not sure how many people will show up and we'll just see what happens. Well, the room got packed. I think the food ran out. I know there were so many questions and I had so much to say that they're like, okay, Matt, that's enough. Move on. We got work to do. But it was a great day, and it does directly speak to scale, because as a producer, the last thing you want is to roll up your sleeves, put a bunch of work into an effort, and then 2 years from now have the rug pulled out from under you and say, well, we tried. But when you can see that commitment and now layering on the 2030 goal, well, okay, now as a processing facility, maybe we should invest in the time it takes to do this. As a producer, maybe we should push along and try to separate these products from the supply chain. Oh, maybe we should. So it's about confidence in the market, and it's about commitment at all levels of the organization and all parties involved. And that to me was the magic combination that pushed all this heavy lifting forward to get us to where we are today. And well, we look forward to, much bigger things even in the future.
Yeah, totally. Well, we're wrapping up here. I got a couple of kind of closing questions for you guys that are a little bit more, I guess, tactical, if you will. But Matt, give people a sense of where they can find Thousand Hills products. I mean, obviously, this is a COVID year. There's been meat shortages. People are at home more, and they're paying attention to their health and thinking about different things, thinking about environmental impact in light of what's going on in terms of climate change and other aspects. How can people find out more about what you guys are offering and what you've got in the marketplace?
Well, real quick, I did learn during COVID this past year that there is real truth to this decentralized, smaller scale processing, because we were able to stay processing at a 95% fill rate due to the great work of our processors and the steps they took throughout their facilities, but that they were manageable facilities that could actually do that with the right practices. So kudos to all the processing facilities that really kept us going and able to keep meat on the shelf without significant price increases on our part. So that was awesome. And then we work with retailers primarily that match our values. So your co-ops, your natural food stores. I know we're in the neighboring co-op in New Hampshire there with Timberland. And then, of course, you can buy it online as well at Thousand Hills Lifetime Grazed or Grazed Grub, GRAZGRUP.com.
Great. And then Zach, what's next for Timberland? And I'm just going to embed a question in there because we keep getting, and I know you do too, and I know the answer to this, but just give you a chance to talk about the casualties of COVID. What's next for Timberland, and where's the women's boot?
That's a great question. Yeah. So we launched the first boots came out this fall in the US. There's a men's version of that boot, and in Europe there is a men's and a women's version available. Spring 21 though, we'll be having, that was fall 20. Spring 21 we'll be having more styles, and I believe as of right now a women's style will be available then as well. And then fall 21, we're excited that we'll be launching our first boot that's a designated workwear boot, so really designed for the farmers and ranchers that we're aiming to support through these programs. So excited about that too. And then beyond our regenerative leather program, we have a lot in the works with really piloting new regenerative supply chains across all of our top volume material categories. So we're expanding our leather program, as mentioned, but also we just kickstarted a regenerative rubber project in Thailand, working to develop and source rubber from smallholder farmers using a practice called dynamic agroforestry to grow their rubber. We're at the early stages of a regenerative sugarcane project in Brazil, and we'll be aiming to use that material as a bio additive to our EVA soles in our shoes. We also funded the transition of 250 farmers in India to the regenerative organic certification, and we'll be sourcing cotton from them starting in fall 21. And then lots of pilots on the circularity front as well. And as I mentioned, all of these will really be used as test and learn opportunities to scale them significantly in the future. So definitely stay tuned for more. We'll be sharing kind of more information on the development of those projects and when we have the products actually coming to market with those materials for the first time.
Sure. Well, I want to thank you both. I can't tell you how exciting this is. It really feels like the gravitas of a watershed moment that kind of, I think about it a lot of like the 4-minute mile. Like once somebody did it, now everybody's like, oh, we can do that too. And the way that I just feel like this is going to pull the whole leather industry up, the regenerative livestock industry up. I want to thank both of you for the incredible amount of hard work that you've done. It's a joy to work with each of you. I want to thank all the other people behind the scenes that have made this happen. And particularly Other Half Processing and Jim and Mark and what they did to really innovate this space and make it a reality. And to everyone else on your teams, new producer cooperatives that are coming on board and individual producers around the world that are coming on board into this. Thank you guys. I think that with this collective effort and this collaboration, we can synergize and not to be too cliche, but I really think we're making the world a better place. So thank you guys for all of the hard work that you're doing.
Awesome. Thanks, Chris. Big thanks to Savory too for all the support in this work.
Yep. Thank you to Timberland and Savory for all your heavy lifting. It's been a joy.
Yeah, likewise, guys. Cool. Well, thanks, everybody. We'll send a report out after this, and the recording will be available, and we'll do this again in a month. Have a good one.
Awesome. Thanks, everyone.
Bye.
Thank you.